on this episode of Indiana Education Insight.
Well, I've been in hundreds of schools around the country, 4 different states, and in those states, the education systems were very different. But what I found, just kind of that common element you see in effective schools, is the leadership. You know, it is the principal that makes a difference in the schools. It is the principal who creates those conditions so others can be successful.
Every week, the Indiana Association of Public School Superintendents is taking you inside today's Indiana education collaboration and tomorrow's education trends. We're staying on the pulse of public school innovators throughout Indiana and beyond. Join our conversation and contribute to our upcoming topics at iapssin.org/podcast. Here's your host, Dr. J.T. Koopman.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode of Indiana Education Insight. I'm Dr. J.T. Koopman, Executive Director of the IPSS. This podcast is being delivered by our IPSS team and produced by our friends at Edge Media Studios. As the Executive Director of IPSS, I'm excited to bring you this weekly show where we feature Indiana education innovators from all over our great state, from students to superintendents. We'll also be talking to higher education leaders and educators at the state level as we work together as proactive public education advocates. That's why IPSS is here and why we're proud to bring you this show. Every week, we're talking about trending topics in the public education space while bringing in Indiana education innovators to hear their perspective. As with any organization, it takes great leadership to be successful, and that is one of the main missions of IPSS, developing great district leaders. It's always great to have experienced and passionate educators joining the show, so let's get today's conversation going.
Topics and trends in Indiana education.
Today's guest is Dr. Linda Marrs-Morford, Executive Director of the Indiana Principals Leadership Institute. She's been a principal and a professor of educational leadership, as well as numerous public speaking engagements. So she has been instrumental in shaping the conversation about Indiana public schools. And she also has the ability to look at education from various lenses, which is very important. Of course, she has been a tremendous asset to public education in Indiana. So let's find out how she views the issues in Indiana public schools. Welcome, Dr. Marrs-Morford. We're thrilled to have you with us on today's show. So if you could tell us a little bit about your background and your various roles in Indiana and in other states.
Well, thank you, JT, and thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure to be able to kind of share what's going on with IPLI and talk about some of the issues here in Indiana. Just a little bit about my background. I'm a native Hoosier. I grew up in southern Indiana, went to Clay City High School, and did my undergrad and master's at Purdue University. In fact, I was a member of the first women's basketball team at Purdue. After I finished at Purdue, I headed south to Texas. I had to get out of Dodge. And so I went to Austin, Texas, and there I taught at the university for 3 years before I decided to use my teaching degree. And I would say it was that first public school teaching experience that really shaped my life professionally. I started teaching at Chisholm Trail Middle School in Round Rock, Texas, which is a very large and diverse school district just north of Austin. Mm-hmm. I taught social studies and, of course, coached 3 sports, as all new teachers do.
That's right.
But that school was on its way to becoming an international model middle school. And so I think back to that experience, and at that time, they were doing everything right. Mm-hmm. We had teaming at the grade level, and we also had teaming by subject area. I had 2 mentors as a new teacher, which is unheard of.
Absolutely.
And I'd say if it wasn't for them, I'm not sure I'd still be in education. But we had wonderful leadership in that school district. Teachers received 2 weeks of intensive professional development every summer. So it really shaped me as a professional educator. But after our son was born, my husband got a job in upstate New York. So away we went to upstate New York, where I coached junior college for a couple of years. And when our daughter was born, decided the recruiting was just too much. So I went back to teaching, encouraged to get my administrative certificate, and ended up doing a master's and a doctorate at SUNY Albany. And I was hired as assistant principal, then became principal of our middle school, led our faculty in the development of that middle school concept, built a new building. It was wonderful. About a month before we moved in, my husband got a job at the University of Illinois in Champaign, Urbana, Illinois. So away we came back to the Midwest, which was nice for me because I was close to family. And I was assistant director at the University of Illinois Laboratory High School, which is a 5-year public high school for academically talented students.
Okay.
So my role was like a principal's role, and then there was a director that was more like a superintendent role. After I finished my doctorate at SUNY Albany, I was hired at Eastern Illinois University, where I taught in the Ed Leadership Department for 12 years. During that time, I served as chair. I was director of the New Leaders Assistance Service, which is a mentoring program for new administrators in Illinois. I was involved in the state mentoring program for school principals. I also wrote an NCLB grant that provided PLC training to 40 school teams in Southern Illinois.
Wow. Okay.
And so that was just a wonderful experience. But when the job opened at Indiana State for director of IPLI, I said, that's my dream job. So I applied, and here I am today. And so almost 5 years later, we're getting ready to start our 6th cohort this summer. So I say I'm living the dream.
Well, and we're very fortunate to have someone with your talent and your experience leading that group. I know that it was difficult to probably get that off the ground, but through the help from Indiana State, it's well on its way and is nationally recognized as one of the premier programs in the country for principal development. So I give you a lot of
few out there.
Give you a lot of kudos for that.
Well, I had a lot of support. So
well, it's great for our principals to have that in existence, certainly under your leadership as well. So thank you. We appreciate that. Speaking of that, we know that you have an interest in all Indiana public schools and school leaders across the state in a variety of ways. So based on your experiences, why do you believe that IPLI is so important for our school leaders?
Well, I've been in hundreds of schools around the country, 4 different states, and in those states, the education systems were very different. But what I found, just kind of that common element you see in effective schools, is the leadership. You know, it is the principal that makes a difference in the schools. It is the principal who creates those conditions so others can be successful. Right. And so as part of IPLI, that's what we focus on. It's a 2-year intensive professional development program for school principals. In that first year, we focus on the principal and helping him or her increase her leadership capacity. Sure. And then in year 2, that focus shifts to the schools. And we ask our principals to bring 2 teacher leaders with them to the seminars, and together they study the data from their schools that we've collected, analyze those results, look at best practices, and develop an improvement plan so that they can increase the learning capacity of the school. But that element that we keep coming back to, and really kudos to our state legislature for recognizing that leadership is important, and it's the principal who creates those conditions for others to be successful in their school.
Now, if I understand correctly, that through that 2-year process, they also have a culminating action research project?
Yes, we use an action research model. We also refer to it as action inquiry. And so what we do through that process, it's a process of collecting data, analyzing that data, going out and looking at best practices. What does the research telling us about what effective principals do, what effective schools do? Sure. They develop an improvement plan, they implement that, and then they collect data as to did it work, did it not work, what are my next steps? And we think that's an important piece, because so often in schools we just pick the next best thing
Right.
that's out there, and we try it. We don't really collect data about it, and then along comes something else. We're trying to get away from that and have our principals and our school teams engage in this action inquiry process that really forces them to collect data about their school, analyze that data, look at what's working, what's not working, and develop their improvement plans.
So obviously we have several hundred, if not thousands, of principals in the state of Indiana. Can you give us some idea about the application process?
Okay. Well, it's pretty simple. On our website, indianapli.org, if a principal's interested in applying to IPLI, and I have to go back and share a little bit about the statute itself that created IPLI. It says that IPLI is for practicing school principals, and that preference will be given to public school principals with 3 or more years of experience.
Okay.
And so it's it's open to public school principals, and that includes public charter schools. And so if they're interested in applying, they go to indianapli.org, click on the little Apply tab on our website, and there they'll find information about the program. So it's very detailed, tells them exactly what they'll be doing in each year of IPLI, what's involved, what kind of data we'll be collecting, includes the dates for the 2 years, because we think it's important that they can make all of our seminars and those kind of things. And then after that, we have the application, and they click on that. It's all done electronically. The principal completes part 1 of the application, and when they're finished, they send it on to district administration. Usually it's the direct supervisor at the district level, and we're asking our district level supervisors to complete this because we think that's another critical piece of IPLI is that the district supports the principals and what they're doing.
What kind of a time commitment are we looking at here?
Well, it's a 2-year time commitment. And during that 2 years, we have 5 seminars. And it kicks off in July. We have a 2-day seminar on campus. And then we have a day-long seminar in September. Then in November, in conjunction with the Indiana Association of School Principals Conference, we meet there. Then we have a seminar in January and then one in April. And then in the off months, they meet in the region of the state with their mentor, and that's where they engage in networking and also sharing their action research and really kind of problem solving, looking at issues happening around the state.
Okay. That's a little bit about at least part of the history with IPLI. Do you also have partnerships in this?
Yes, we do. We have several partnerships. When we started this, the Indiana Association of School Principals was a huge partner. Dr. Todd Best served on our design team, which was also made up of individuals from the Department of Ed leadership at Indiana State University. So Dr. Steve Gruner was chair at the time, and really helped kind of create a framework for what this might look like. Dr. Terry McDaniel, Dr. Bobby Joe Monahan, Dr. Ryan Donlin, and Dr. Todd Whitaker, who was there at the time, were a part of the design team. And then Dr. Brad Balch was dean of the College of Education. So they were that group there working with the liaison to the legislature at Indiana State, Greg Good, and then Senator Banks at that time, who's now a congressman. He introduced the legislation, which was Senate Bill 402, that created IPLI. And then it was signed in May of 2013 by then Governor Pence and created IPLI. We've had partners develop out of our first few years of working with the program. I joke that we were building this airplane
while it was flying.
While it was flying. It was just one thing after another. So Lawrence Township is a partner, provides facilities for us. Marzano Research out of Colorado came on board with us, and that helps ensure that we're providing the most up-to-date research for our school principals. We had another partnership that was created my first year, I started taking calls in the spring from new principals that want to be part of IPLI. I said, well, we want you to have 2 or 3 years under your belt before you get into this. I said, well, what is there for new administrators? And at that time, there wasn't. Mm-hmm. And so working with IASP and, of course, your organization, we created the Indiana New Administrator Leadership Institute, also known as ANALI. And so that has been a great partnership, and we are now in our 4th cohort of ANALI, and we have 70-some new administrators, and this is deans, assistant principals, and principals involved with that.
Well, again, I want to give you a lot of kudos for having the vision to recognize the need for leadership development, because we know that leadership matters in all aspects. Whatever your organization is leadership makes a big difference. So taking a look at the participants and maybe some of their action research, can you talk a little bit about some of those experiences that they might have going through this program?
Well, there's several different components to IPLI, which I think is really unique in terms of what's being offered across the country in support of school principals. So each year we take 50 to 60 principals into a cohort. Now this is all building levels, so we have elementary, middle school, and high school all sitting down at the table together, which is interesting because they now become more sensitive to the perspective of the other administrators at those different levels. We have schools with, a wide range in terms of poverty. We have 8F schools sitting at the table together, and so it creates a professional network that continues after they leave IPLI. But we take the state of Indiana and we divide it into 11 or 12 regions, and so in each of those regionals, we create what's called a regional focus cohort, and that's led by a trained mentor. So our mentors are recommended by, well, anyone can recommend, but someone to be a mentor, but they go through an extensive review, and then they are trained in the action research process. They're trained on mentoring and those kind of things. And so they meet monthly with those regional focus cohorts. So that's one part of the experience. And as I mentioned before, we have the 5 seminars throughout the year. They have access to a number of resources that are available through the High Reliability Schools Network and through our website. And I will mention that our website has a number of resources for all school administrators. There are tips and tools, and our newsletter always features an article about, the latest thing in education. So those resources are open to all Indiana principals. During the 2 years, we cover their membership in the Indiana Association of School Principals. They also receive registration for the IASP Fall Professionals Conference. They also receive registration for Ed Leaders Network, which is an online professional development program that they can access at any time, and that is just a huge bank of resources for us. They have an opportunity to roll in 12 university credits towards the Indiana State University Educational Specialist Program at a greatly reduced tuition rate. And, of course, they get 45 professional growth points for participating in IPLI.
So that takes them halfway to get their license renewal accomplished then with their 45 points. What a tremendous opportunity for those that participate with all of the resources and the assets that you provide through memberships. I just can't imagine how you have developed all of those things. And I just, again, so proud that you're doing this in the state of Indiana, because not very many other states have this resource available to them. So kudos to you, and certainly the principals that go through this program and then ultimately become district leaders, whether it be assistant superintendents or superintendents. This is also going to benefit them in those roles as well. And as they support from a district level principals in the district, they know the value of the program. So it's just going to be a repetitive process as a result of that. So good for you. I really appreciate that.
Well, I do have to say that there are so many people that have helped develop this. Our design team is just unbelievable and providing feedback and having us think about things in a new way. And kudos to our mentors, too. Our mentors, after every seminar, we always meet. We go through what worked, what didn't work, what kind of recommendations do you have, and they have greatly shaped the development of IPLI.
Of course, the the rock stars that you mentioned as faculty members at Indiana State, it's no wonder that this is such a highly successful program because in our world, those individuals are all rock stars. Mm-hmm. So no surprises there, at least from my perspective.
I agree.
Test-based accountability has been a big driver of school reform over the last 2 decades. And as school systems work to provide an educational experience that prepares students to be lifelong learners and contribute to the 21st century, how should we rethink the preparation of school-based leaders?
Wow, well, that's a topic that is getting a lot of press across the country, not only principal preparation, but teacher preparation. And should university programs look at a different way of preparing school leaders? And I would say the role of the principal today is so different from when I started the principal preparation program back in the 90s. I think you would agree with me. This age of accountability has created unbelievable requirements of that principals. And again, I go back to that idea that it's the principal that creates the conditions for others to be successful in the school. So as a principal, first of all, you've got to be a lifelong learner. Mm-hmm. You've got to have some kind of process in place that keeps you up to date. So with our principal preparation programs, I think that's a critical piece that we need to convey to our future school leaders. You know, they have to be able to collect data, know what data to collect, analyze that data, work with their schools. The research is clear now that the most effective schools have collaborative cultures in place. Sure. And as collaboration increases in the school, we see student achievement increase. So they need to understand culture, how to create those collaborative cultures. Mm-hmm. They have to be instructional leaders. They have to understand curriculum instruction. They need to be able to observe and provide effective teachers or effective feedback to teachers in their school. They need to know how to develop leadership because you can't do the job by yourself anymore.
Right. You
really have to have a team of leaders in the school to move your school forward. And, it is, if you think about how do you prepare someone for that role, I'm not sure a 32 or 36-hour preparation program is going to do that. But what we see effective principal preparation programs doing today is partnering with school district, helping identify those teacher leaders early on, get them involved in different experiences, have them taking on some leadership roles to develop them as they go through their preparation program so they see these things firsthand. And then I don't think that it ends once you graduate from the program. Again, these effective principal preparation programs that we've seen out there, and there's been several studies that have been looking at what works, what helps prepare those principals. But the other thing we've seen is that once they graduate, that they continue that professional development and continue to support those school administrators. And that's really a nice thing that Indiana State University and the Department of Leadership there and the Bi College of Ed has stepped up and created this IPLI. I mean, because it is a way to support those principals.
Right. Now, you've mentioned multiple times the need for collaboration and the need for data and the need to take a look at feedback. So since you've been engaged in the program, can you share some of the results that essentially validate the program?
Okay. Well, I'll talk about the 2 years because they're a little bit different. As I mentioned before, that first year is focused on increasing the leadership capacity of the principals. So they're admitted into the program by the end of March. In May, we had them administering surveys in their schools, collecting data on their leadership.
Okay.
And then, so when they come to the summer seminar, they have that data, and our mentors help walk them through how to analyze that data. And from there, they identify their strengths and their areas for potential growth. And they start to think about, okay, what are some things I could be doing? What are some things I want to try out to help increase my leadership capacity? They create this action research project, they implement it, and of course, all along the way, they're getting feedback from their mentors and their colleagues in their regional groups. But they implement that, and then they collect data again, analyze. And then at the end of the first year, they present their research as part of our action research showcase. And so they have an opportunity to share it with colleagues and, again, get feedback and then take the next steps. Okay, so now what am I going to focus on? So every year coming out of that first year, we have 50 to 60 action research projects. Now, in year 2, the focus shifts to the school. And we use Marzano's High Reliability School Framework. They're surveys. We don't, I tell people we're not in the accreditation business. We're not here to certify people or anything. We here in Indiana, we don't have a common school improvement framework that every school uses. Yep. So you have some using Advanced Ed, some using INSAE, some using Marzano High Reliability Schools, but we needed to have a common language we could use. So we went with Marzano Research because it was fairly easy to use, and we were kind of part of their pilot program early on and created this partnership. So they administer these surveys about their schools, and we do 3 levels of surveys. The first survey focuses on a safe and collaborative culture in the school. The second survey looks at do you have effective teaching in every classroom? And the third level is do you have a guaranteed and viable curriculum in place in your school? So we just use those first 3 levels, but we collect data on their schools. They bring those 2 teachers with them and form these little mini school improvement teams. They analyze that data, and then they create their action research. So that's a school improvement plan. At the end of the year, they share that.
I'm kind of curious. I absolutely agree that you must have teacher leadership developed in your schools if you're going to get some things accomplished. Has anybody revealed with you, or maybe there's a process, that how they select those teachers that they bring with them?
Yes. Steve Gruner leads it. In fact, we had seminars last Monday and Tuesday was our Cohort 1, and we start in January having them think about who are the 2 teacher leaders we want to bring with us next year. And Steve starts out saying, they might not be your best, they might not be your friends. You look at who's connected and respected in your schools, and actually leads them through a little activity where they map out their teacher leaders in their school, and from that they select those 2 teacher leaders.
Well, that's a Steve's so good at making those analogies, who's connected and respected. So that's a good way to identify those folks. And, there's, in my experience, and probably in yours as well, there have been teachers that just kind of want to stay in the shadows and, don't bother me, I just want to do my thing. But you realize that they have leadership capabilities, and then once you kind of unleash that leadership, it's phenomenal what they can do for the benefit of the school. So,
yeah, it's amazing. We do exit surveys after all of our seminars, and of course at the end of the program, and our teachers are just constantly saying, "This was so eye-opening for me. I learned so much. It has motivated me to take a more active role in the leadership in my school." So.
Yeah. It does. It makes a huge difference.
And I would say at first, principals are kind of hesitant about, I'm going to bring 2 teacher leaders with me, But by the end of it, they say that's one of the best parts of the program. Because now, I don't know if you've seen that TED Talk about how to start a movement.
Yes, I have.
About the lone nut, and you need those 2 first followers. That's kind of what when we introduce this to our principals about how to select your 2 teachers, we said we need those 2 first followers, because you're the lone nut, and they're going to help you move your school forward.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So in closing, what advice do you have for Indiana school leaders as they move forward?
Wow. I could spend a long time talking about that. But I guess
It's your show, Linda.
Oh, okay. How much time do we have? I would just say in this time of great change, it just seems like every week, if not every day, something's changing, and individuals might think it's just Indiana, but it's everywhere. It's every state. When there's changes at the national level and things come down from there, it just that trickle down. So I think it's real easy for principals to get distracted. And I guess my best advice that I could give is don't let that stuff distract you from your focus. Your focus has to be on the students in your schools and doing what's best for them. And if you do that, then you're going to be successful, you and your school.
Right. Distinguishing between the minutia and the substance. Absolutely.
Don't get distracted.
That's right. Good advice. Well, thank you, Doctor, and thank you for being our guest on IPSS's edition of Indiana Education Insight.
Thank you.
Now it's our time to wrap up this episode with my take on the current state of affairs in the Indiana education landscape.
Dr. JT's closing comments.
Although you pointed out that accountability is still important, but there are many factors that go into preparing all students to become lifelong learners and contributors in the 21st century. As such, we need to begin to change the dialogue. We also discussed the teacher shortage and the need to address human capital issues and rebrand the profession of education. As such, we need to change the dialogue. Due to the complex issues associated with school reform, we need to engage our communities and have them help us develop the portrait of a graduate. As such, we need to change the dialogue. Through this public dialogue, it is my hope that we can get our legislators and our state leaders to see the value of public schools and the nexus of promoting public schools and economic development in Hoosier communities. I see these as investments in our children and in our state, not as expenditures. Perhaps we can pursue this issue and others in another segment. On our next show, on February 26th, we welcome Mr. Tony Bagshaw, educational consultant for Battelle for Kids. Perhaps he can provide some additional insight into the State House and education. Join us for that and more on the next Insight into Indiana Education. Thanks for being part of education. Please stand up for Indiana Public Schools.